And welcome to another low-code live build. My name is Jan de Vries, and I'm your low-code host. And today we're going to be talking how you can build your own reusable or REST web services. And it's going to make your life a lot easier because whenever you want to build something that needs to be reused or needs to be applied in a lot of different cases, why not make it once and make it usable for all of these cases? And that's exactly what Marc Lehane from Kinetech did for one of his customers. And he's going to teach you today how you can do that yourself. So he's going to run you through what he built and explain exactly how he did it. So without further ado, I want to welcome Marc to the session.
Hey, Jan, how's it going?
Very good. Thank you for joining today. I want to take a look at what we're going to be talking about today. So first of all, let's take a look at the agenda. We're going to be talking about what the session today will look like, what you can do, how you can chat with us and ask your questions. Then we'll go through the build itself. What are we going to be building? What does the application look like? What kind of technology are we going to be using? And of course, we'll do a little app demo to see what the end result looks like so you can see what we're building towards. And then, of course, we'll do the actual live build, and we'll be building the integration itself. At the end, we'll do a little recap. We'll share some resources with you, some handy links to some documentation and videos that should help you make your own REST services. And of course, at the end, we'll get to the Q&A. Now, talking about Q&A, if you have any questions for me or for Marc during the live session, put them in the Twitch chat. You do need to be logged into Twitch to ask your questions, but we'll see the questions and we'll ask them and cover them at the end of the live build. Or if it's a really, really good question, I might just say, hey, Marc, hold up. I got a really good question. We need to answer this right now. Of course, this session is being recorded and will be available right after we finish the live session on mendix.com/live. So you can always watch it at your own pace or share it with other people who might be interested in this topic. As usual, you can download the project files. So go to this bit.ly link that you see here in the bottom of the screen, and you can download the package, the exact package that we are working with today. Right, moving on. We know that we're going to be making a reusable REST web services, but Marc, can you tell us a little bit more about what that means exactly? What are you going to be using in terms of technology, modules, and things like that?
Sure. So to be clear, the REST service that we're using is going to be a parameterized REST service. So you're not going to have your traditional body payload. It's going to be parameters within the URL that's sent. Basically, what happened, the story goes, is we were working with a customer who had a number of different lead providers who were giving them data to bring in as a lead. So their sales organization had, gets their leads from external sources. They need to be able to work with them, but that ultimately every provider had a different set of or way of providing the information. So let's say I've got a first name, last name, email, what have you. Some providers were calling it F name or first or something to that effect. So what we needed to do was either start mapping or individual REST services or figure out a way to take them all at once. What we did was we used all Mendix to create a REST service, ultimately take data, transform it into key pairs, use those key pairs to map it back to an entity within the application that we had. Oh, you're muted.
Excellent. That's really an example of making something reusable instead of doing it 10 or X times over. So that's
right.
Perfect. I'm, of course, really curious what it looks like in practice. So perhaps you can show us a little demo.
Absolutely. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And I'll talk about some of the other stuff within Mendix that we used to get there. First screen you're going to see here is my Postman screen. This is just an application you can use to send REST calls, to test REST calls. So in this case, I'm going to be testing my local host using some information sent over to our application. I'll just go ahead and send it right now, jump into our application, and you'll see a very basic screen where I've got my lead providers and my leads. So a lead provider, of course, is going to provide our leads. We can look at their details. They've just got a name. And ultimately, they have a template configured for how we're going to handle the information that's sent. We'll dive into that in a bit. But for now, we'll just jump over and we'll see the leads that I had sent over. I've done this twice now, but ultimately you see the lead came through with the information that was sent from Postman. So that's just a quick, hey, this is what it does at the end. Obviously, there's a lot more that goes under the hood. Pretty straightforward mapping a REST service in general, but the way we did it, again, taking this information and potentially making it so that you could bring on a new lead provider and map their instance very quickly without having to redeploy is the key point here for the demonstration. Quickly, got a quick Word file I just want to show you. Basically, the goal is we're going to take a string. This is the string from the parameters. We're going to turn that into some split results, which is just a list of pieces that we got out of the string, turned into key pairs, and then ultimately mapped back into our application. So this is, in essence, a view of how the process would go. But I think what people are really interested in is how is it done in Mendix. So let's talk about the most important things. How did we get here? We've got a few modules that we got from the marketplace. We've got Community Commons. We have the dynamic change object module. That's the powerhouse behind most of what we did here. And then model reflection, which I think as a developer myself, you know, I use quite a bit. Oftentimes it's for Excel import, but lately it's been for, you know, more dynamic change activities, and this became, you know, a good example that we talked about. We made a small change to the model reflection. You'll see that I actually didn't change the domain model at all. In our MX object member, there's something called a descriptive name, which is basically hidden for the most part within the traditional out-of-the-box deployment of model reflection. But if we look into the application here, and I go to my model reflection section, model reflection does a great job of taking what you've built, showing you the modules, showing you the entities and microflows that go into it. In this case, we're looking at the leads module, the lead entity, and then the attributes of the lead. All I've done is added a column here to show our descriptive name. And so what I'm doing is a descriptive name is what I'm using as a way of taking my table. I built DOB, that's date of birth. Oftentimes people do know what that means, but maybe the layperson doesn't. So what I want to do is be able to use a descriptive name so that anybody can go in and configure these mappings without having to say, well, what does this one mean? What does that mean? So we've simply done that. We've added it into this field so that I can just go ahead and give it whatever descriptive name I want. There's one other App Store module that would have been used, could be used in a different way. It's the string split utility. I've got a Java action that does exactly what that module does. It just does it a little bit different. As you know, or may or may not know, the payload or parameterized payload is going to have your values, your labels, and your values. And they're separated. First, we have a question mark that tells me information is coming afterwards. Then we've got value or label equals value. And then an ampersand here that tells me, hey, we're going to the next one. So I know what my label is and what my value is. And so oftentimes that's what you're going to use in order to map in Mendix. And that's how we're going to do it here, but slightly different. Jumping back in, let's just take a look at a couple of the domain models that we put together for handling this. First is our leads domain model. Very straightforward. We've got a lead provider who provides us a number of leads. And then we've got this entity that I've called unused key pairs. I'll jump into that a bit later, but focusing predominantly here, we've got lead provider and leads. A lead provider has a single template, and that is going to allow for us to look, find out what they've mapped to, and translate it into our lead. Jumping over to the domain model for post parsing, you can see that we have a split input. So right here, this is where we're doing all of our, what I showed you here in this Word document. This exact process is outlined by this domain model. So I'm going to take in a split.
Could you zoom that in just a little bit?
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
So I'm going to take in my split input, which is my string. We're going to turn it into a list of split results. Over those split results, we're actually going to turn them into key pairs. Again, I'll show you that a bit later. But then focusing here, we've got our template that is for our lead provider, and then we have a list of mappings. We're going to take those split results, take the label, create a mapping, and then ultimately we need to map it to a Mendix object member, and that's where we'll go ahead and have that here. So that's the domain model. Let's take a look at how we actually get there. So if I'm looking, well, let's jump back into the application. And what I'm going to do is add a new lead provider. We'll call it our test maker. I've created a way of clicking a button, creating a template. We'll just call this my test maker template. And then I could actually use a post example to convert into mappings. So let me just take this example from test maker. We're going to take everything after the question mark. We're going to throw it into our string here. And we're going to say convert to mappings. And you'll see for every value, we've created a label. So we've got our test maker ID, op ID, first, last, email address. And we've ignored all the values because we're only concerned with labels for creating a template. What I need to do now is go into each and simply match it to a descriptive name. So test maker ID can be, say, our unique ID, op ID could be our lead name, so on and so forth. We'll just quickly go through these, connect them all up. And then we'll hit save. So now my test maker is configured and I'm ready to be able to take in information from test maker. Let's jump back over to the model and talk about what happened there. So if we go in to our homepage and we look at our lead provider, you'll see I've got my page with my lead snippet. Go into my snippet, and we'll go into this part here where I've created a microflow to just create a temporary split input so that I could provide my string. We'll convert that. We'll take this information as well as my template, go through. Let's just jump into it. We'll go to that microflow, and you'll see that I have my split input, my post template. And from this information, I'm going to create a list of key pairs, iterate over it, and do some things. Let's jump into the split string activity first. Split string activity is interesting in that it's an iterator, but it's a little bit different. As you'll see, we've created a manual iteration, and we're going to iterate over each until we're done. So we're going to take this string, we're going to run that Java action that I talked about earlier, which looks for all of those ampersands and equal signs so that we can determine what is my split result list. I'm going to then create my key pairs and go through. We're going to actually circle back to this in a moment. We're gonna rebuild this so I can talk about how we got there. But let's just finish through this. We'll have our key pairs. We're going to iterate over our key pairs. We're going to retrieve a label that matches our label, our mapping, find a object that has the same, and then we're going to create. So in this case, we're actually hoping to already have an object member that matches the name of the key pair label. If we don't have that, then we're going to create one, or we're going to leave it blank and leave it for the person to fill out. So then we ultimately result in our template that you see, and we can manage it from there. Let's go ahead and jump into the build of that split string, or the result of the split string, and then we'll rebuild that. We'll dive into the rest of it where the REST services happen and everything from there. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and say, let's add a microflow. And in this case, I'm going to say it's my demo split string. And the expectation is that I'm going to have, let's zoom in, make sure you guys can all see what I'm doing here. We are going to start with a string. And again, that's our URL payload. And we're going to start manipulating it from there. So first step is to take our split string Java action and run it. You'll see that what it wants is a simple string, and that's our URL payload in this case. And it's going to return our list of split result. We'll have that. We'll need, at the end, a list of key pairs. So I'm going to create an empty list of my object key pair. And I'm going to start filling that up as we build it out. So now I'm going to start doing the things that actually happen. I'm going to take out this endpoint for now. We'll add it back afterwards. But I know that I probably am going to merge because, oh, that was not a merge. We'll go ahead and add a merge because I know that after we start doing, we're going to keep coming back and keep coming back. So I've got my list. What I want to do is grab the very first one from the top of my list. So we'll do a list activity. And what we're going to do is find the head, which will be our first one. And that's going to be my split result. So we'll just call this our first split result. And so we could also call that, in essence, our label if you want. We also want to go ahead and make sure that now that we've got it, we want to change our list. And that's our return list. We want to remove our first split result. So now we've got a list minus the one that I just pulled out. We're going to go ahead and do this again because I know that for everything I have, let's just annotate it to make sure we all know. So here I'm going to have my label. And then I need my value as well. Ideally, what I've shown you so far, we only need the label. So we could have been done here. We could just ignore this and just remove the next one. But I want to be able to call this in the future part of the application where we're actually getting the payload. I can use the same operation to then use my labels and values, keeping in mind that key pairs are a non-persistent object. So we're going to drop them all at the end anyways. So stamping their value is no big deal. So we're going to go ahead and get the first one. We'll call this one our second split result. And again, I'll add an annotation. That's going to be my value. And one more time, we'll do a remove activity. Now, when you copy and paste, make sure you're changing those values because oftentimes it's still thinking that you're using that first one. So that's the only catch is copy and paste is great until you don't check it and you start removing the wrong things from your list. So now I've got my label, I've got my value. I haven't created my key pair yet. So let's go ahead and create an object. And that object, again, will be my key pair. So in the example I showed you, what we wanted to do was set the association between key pair and split string. We don't need that. What we're only going to worry about is the label here for now. And that's going to be my first split result. Split ID is my label. And then my value, of course, would be my second split result, split ID. So now I've got that newly created. Problem is that at the end of this microflow, I still want to return this key pair list. So what I need to do is now change my list of key pair values. I'm going to add my new key pair. Now I just want to know, hey, is my list empty? Are we done here? So that's split. Let's see, list empty, question mark. And then we check to see if the returned list is now empty. Because again, we're going to keep removing them until it is. If it's not empty, we're going to circle back and go there. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and be done. So let's say it is done. And now let's zoom out quickly so I can connect this inheritance or decision split to connect back to my merge. And so now it says, hey, if the list isn't empty, let's keep going till we build them all up. We don't have any errors. Now, the one thing we are missing is I want to say this list that I'm building up here is what I want to return. So we go ahead and return that. And so that gets introduced into our list, gets brought back to the other microflow and can be used. So transitioning now, that's all well and good. We've made it so that you can set up the template on the lead provider side. But how do we do it on the REST side? Let's go ahead and open the REST service that we've put together. This video, we're not going to actually dive into how you put these things together. We'll look at a bit of it. Resources provided at the end should give you the very good context on how to configure these things. Service name, manage your version. You'll see that it shows you how to test it locally as a base. And then resources, you can create a number of different resources. In this one, we've got our demo resource. And then what operations do I want to have for my demo resource? This one here is what I've created. You'll see that it's a post method. The operation path is my provider ID. So my example location is now going to be REST lead demo provider ID. So this provider ID should allow us to determine who the provider is that's giving us the lead. We will jump into our microflow in a moment, but you'll see the parameter, very basic parameter within the path, provider ID, again, provider ID here. Show that microflow, scroll over to the left, and we're going to dive into exactly how this comes about. You'll see that parameter provider ID, then we've got our HTTP information. So we know we've got our REST call that's coming in. First, check for our provider in the database, has the name of the provider ID. If that's empty, we're going to kick it out, give them a bad response. Hey, we didn't find the provider. Assuming they are here, we're going to go ahead, retrieve their template. This is a one-to-one association, so we're using an association to grab it. And then this is where we start getting into, I guess, the meat and potatoes of it all. So we want to find within our request URI the question mark. Again, if we jump back, question mark indicates, hey, this is where all your data is now going to be. So I want to know, hey, where is that question mark? So that I can go ahead and find it and determine what my starting point of my string that I want is. Now, fun fact is, of course, if you use a combination of find and or a number of finds, you can actually build that split string activity using 100% Mendix. But since it's already built in Java and in the marketplace, why not just go ahead and download it and use that information there? We're going to create an object that's going to be our split. We're going to ultimately take the substring, being the point in our URI where the question mark was +1. So everything after that question mark we want to pull in, and that will be our value that we're going to use to then pass into that same microflow where we split the string, key pairs come back. We're going to create a list of unused key pairs. So we talked about unused key pairs a little bit earlier. The idea is, providers will give you what they think you need. For now, we only need X number of fields, but what if they say, tomorrow we're like, oh, well, you know what? We actually need some unique identifier or something from the system that, you've already been providing to us. What we've decided to do was say, hey, we'll take those, we'll attach them to the lead just in case maybe in the future we have to go back and grab them. We'll always have them to be looked back upon. So if we jump back into that domain model, again, we create that lead, and then we're going to create those key pairs to match back up. So let's go back into the microflow we were using, which is our get lead. I created my empty list of unused key pairs. Now this is about the only spot where we're going to do, I'll call it hard coding. So we're going to create that object that you're trying to map to. So whatever it is, whatever you're taking in, whatever it is that's dynamic, ultimately it's going to then get to something within your known database. Unless you're just looking to display key pairs, then you could style your page a certain way, and then it's just completely reflexive all the time. In this case, I want to know, hey, this is my structure, this is my lead, so I'm going to go ahead and create my new lead. And then over each key pair, I'm going to start using this lead to do some things. Obviously, we're going to first make sure we have our mapping, labels to labels, make sure it's for the provider template that we're using. And then you'll see that we have to create a string because parameterized URL payloads are going to have, they're going to need to be URL decoded. So we know that we can use the equal signs and the ampersands because those are the only pieces that aren't encoded. And so we can absolutely find them as we iterate through, but we do need to go back and decode so we get the plain text that should come back from the payload. We get that. We're going to then determine, hey, was there a mapping? If there is no mapping, we're just going to create an unused key pair, give it a label, a value, and then associate it to our lead. So again, our key pairs are going to be a list of basically our attribute and what the value we want to put into that attribute is. Last step, pretty important step, is going to be our microflow in which we're using the actual dynamic change object. Basically, we're going to take in that lead. We're going to take in our decoded value. We're going to take in that post mapping. First, we're going to use the post mapping to determine which Mendix object member we need to pull in. If it's not mapped, we'll kick out. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and change the lead. So in the dynamic change object Java action, you have an input object, which is going to be the thing that you want to get changed. You have a member, which in this case is going to be our Mendix object member attribute name. And the nice thing is, of course, you could hard code something like this, but if you use model reflection, like I've shown you, you can just trust that it's named properly in your camel case or whatever type of typing that was used. You don't have to worry about, because of course it's already been taken care of by model reflection going into your model and telling you exactly what it should be. So we're just, selecting versus having to type information in. Our new value is going to be that decoded value that we gave you. And then we have the option to commit. Of course, we're doing this in an iterator. It's frowned upon to commit within an iterator, so we're going to say no. We're going to let that build up as we go along. We're going to keep feeding this into our lead, and then we're going to commit both our unused key pair list and our new lead, and we should be done with it. So the last piece that we want to do is probably run back into our Postman, and we can go ahead and test our new setup. So we created our lead provider called TestMaker. We're going to go ahead and send in this information to our application. Hit send. Oh, we got a 500 message, an unexpected error occurred. Let's go ahead and jump back into the modeler, look at the console, and see what the error says. Unparsable date, 784-855. Okay, so why would we be trying to parse a date that looks like a phone number? Let's go back into the application, go into our lead provider, TestMaker. Phone number, I mapped to birthday. So birthday is a date. I gave a phone number. Of course, that's going to be a problem. Let's go ahead and update that, hit save, and go back into Postman, hit send. And my clever got it coach response came back. We should be able to refresh our screen, go into the leads, and you'll see that our new lead came in with all the information that we had. Now, let's just do one more. Let's just say there was some more information, social security number. Maybe there's something else. And we'll just throw some information in there. Go ahead and hit send. Should go through just fine. When we go in and refresh our screen, you'll see our new one came in, but we've also got 2 unused key pairs. So again, in the future, we know we were given this information and we could potentially use it. We could run a similar type activity to then update our lead information using these key pairs. So in summary, creating dynamic services is certainly a possibility and is something that's fairly straightforward. It requires a little bit of outside the box thinking, but at the end of the day, as I've shown you here, we should be able to configure those things. And there's a number of different use cases for this exact same situation, but this was probably the best one to show you in this particular demonstration. That is the end of my demonstration, Jan. So I'm looking.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing the demo and taking people through exactly how you built it and even building out the steps. That's really helpful. I have one slide here, a little quick recap slide. Can you tell the people listening to us today what the main ideas are that you want them to take away from this?
Yeah. So, so you see on your screen here, first of all, working with key pairs. So the idea of being able to deconstruct some information, translate it, and reconstruct it in your own model is the premise of it all. So we've got key pairs, which oftentimes is, when people are first faced with key pairs, it's kind of overwhelming, especially if you don't have a clever way of being able to do that dynamically. So the introduction of that dynamic creator is huge here. So that is that last piece, using dynamic change object and model reflection. So being able to take that information, look into the model, say, hey, these are the things that I have, and these are the things I want to use. And then ultimately being able to get the known values, translate them into the values that have been given by our templated payload in the URL, and then feeding into our main system.
Excellent. Right. So we have one more extra slide for you, and we'll put these links in the chat as well, so they can help you out. These are some helpful links just for the documentation. The first two, the third one and the fourth one are two videos. So yeah, one is how you can make your own REST service or calling a REST service with Mendix, and the other one is how to create your own REST publish. All of these documents are worth checking out. If you haven't seen them yet, or if you haven't read them yet, make sure that you check them out. And yeah, these should help you in your quest for building your own REST services or REST web services. And then, of course, it's time for the Q&A. So if you have any questions for Mark or for me, put them in the chat and we'll get to them right now. Now, I have a very simple question for you, Mark, to start with. Are you going to Mendix World?
I am going to Mendix World. Yes, looking forward to it.
Are you going to fly to Mendix? Ah, Rat, you can't, can you?
Yes, yes. Virtually, I am flying to Mendix World.
Genius. We will be flying again to Mendix World soon, but this year, Mendix World will still be digital, so you can still attend it from your home. Make sure you go to mendixworld.com because we have a lot of interesting sessions for you, for developers, how to build things, new updates about Mendix 9, about Data Hub, workflow, PWA, and many, many more announcements. So make sure you check it out, and I will see you there on September 7th through 9. Now, let's see if we have any questions. I have a question about this topic for you, Mark. And that is, what happens if the model gets changed? Will it cause any breaking changes, or?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's a very important thing to be aware of, because anytime you change the model, let's just say that you want to add attributes to your lead. You can go ahead, model that out, but model reflection doesn't just update itself, right? So every time you make a change and you're using model reflection, you should do a refresh on that model to make sure that that's in sync. As far as, you know, I mean, we could dive into a number of different variations on it all, but at the end of the day, as long as you didn't change something that, you know, naming change shouldn't matter. Your mappings in this case would stay the same, but of course the name of it all would change. But because we've decided to use an association versus hard coding, I now just say, hey, what's it called now? Because model reflection takes care of it. So in this case, it's, you know, I'm not going to say it's future proof, but it's also, it certainly won't require me to go back in, redeploy, make a change, redeploy.
Yeah. Easily adaptable. It's good.
Right. Yeah.
How did you set the custom success message response, the got it coach?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sharing my screen still, right? Ultimately, at the end of that microflow that I was showing you is just a string return, and I hard coded in got it coach.
Perfect. Okay, other question. How does this approach work for all the REST methods? So post, put, patch, delete.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. It certainly depends on, you know, how you're trying to work with it, but for the most part, my only experience is, of course, using the post, and we've decided that that's how we're going to manipulate the data from there. But yeah, I believe some of them require a body and don't allow for parameterized URLs. So yeah, you definitely need to look into some of those things before just going ahead and trying to build it that way.
So would this work with, for example, a SOAP API?
No, it wouldn't, because SOAP is, you've got your WSDL, you've got your contract. That's one way of doing it, right? So REST is nice, in which you could just get it all from the URL, but you don't get that with, you get a true XML payload with SOAP. So
Yeah.
there would have to be mappings. I mean, there's ways of doing it, but it would be a significantly larger exercise.
Right. All right. I have a different question. It's about documentation. So I know Mendix apps, they all have a built-in Swagger, but there's not much detail there. So how should I, or how should anyone document their published REST services?
Yeah, so I mean, there's definitely a lot of debate with regards to how things should be documented, right? So in this case,
we can agree documentation should be there, right?
Yes, and it depends on who you're working with or for as to how documented it needs to be. In this case, really the only unique attribute to the payload is that the provider ID. So it's pretty straightforward. There wouldn't be a lot of documentation, but it's kind of flipped on its head, right? There's an expectation of this is you've already got something in place that you're sending. I'm just looking for a dynamic way of taking it without having to create multiple instances of that, because I'm using a different lead provider. So in this case, it's, hey, I just need you before you give me that payload, I need you to send it to this URL, and including in that is the provider ID, in which I'm telling them that that's their provider ID.
Yeah, makes sense. So seeing as this is a REST web service that is easily integratable or adaptable with different providers and different data inputs, have you had to, or have you been in a situation where you have reused this functionality itself for other projects? Do you see possibility for maybe a marketplace module or something like that? Or is this?
I mean, I've used the same pattern for various things, not necessarily specifically this use case, but I could see something put together, a baseline module that allows you to just download and have that set up, basically a template to map, the core concept of my key pair to my template mapping to my Mendix object, and ultimately creating that dynamically through those values.
And I'm wondering, have you thought, maybe this doesn't apply to the situation at all, but have you thought about a way where you could change the settings or the functionality of the functionality that you've built in the front end instead of in Studio Pro?
Say that again, but maybe I'll understand this time.
So we saw in the app that you could make mappings. I guess the question is, how do you decide what you're able to do in the app itself and how much is in Studio Pro? Like, how much do you want to allow your application users to be able to configure compared to what you developed in Studio Pro?
Yeah, so that's actually a really good question. If we look back to when I was making those mappings and I was using the dropdown, I didn't show you, but I had an XPath constraint on the dropdown that said, hey, this has to have a descriptive name. So I have now chosen what is available for you to use in your dropdown, because I said, as long as I've provided a descriptive name, then you should be able to drop down and use it. Now, this starts getting a little bit more complicated when we start talking about different entities being able to be used. And so, yeah, it can become a real spider web, if you will, depending on how elaborate you're trying to make it. And then, of course, the question becomes, how comfortable are you with the end user being able to do this thing?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the conversation that you've had with them to figure out what are their needs and what do they need to do themselves, and how much extra work would it be for you, and balancing that.
Yeah, and what are the end users capable of doing? Who should be assigned this? Then that gets into the security conversation of, hey, do we just make this an admin thing? Do we make this an end user thing? We've actually talked with a couple who now want to potentially make it so that they could create their own template. So in essence, give us the payload first. We give them a screen, says, hey, this is what you've given us. What do you want? Where do you want to map this to? And then we take it from there. So actually flipping it completely on its head and saying, okay, hey, thanks, provider. Now tell me what I'm supposed to do with this. So
right. That's very interesting. That's exactly flipping it. Yeah. It's not, this is how we want it, but how are you sending it to us?
Right. This is what we got. Where do you plan to put it?
Yeah. Interesting. We got a question here from the audience, from Shred and Braden. I'm just going to say usernames because, that's the username. Have you ever thought of sending the data in a body JSON payload, but including extra metadata in the JSON body so that you know what objects you need to deserialize into?
Sure. But again, in this conversation, it was with people who had a standard, hey, this is our lead, this is what we're giving you. We have talked about some of those things with some other customers. You start getting into some advanced payloads and trying to make sure we can handle those. Oftentimes we end up in a situation where we're just mapping them individually. But yes, we have had some of those conversations peripherally, but in the cases in the past, we've never had more than maybe two. In this case, we had a handful to start with, and they said they had no idea as to how many we would end with. So I didn't want to keep having to redeploy. So it really does depend on how many times, what it is. But yes, a very long way of saying yes, it was considered. And not in this particular case, but it has been considered before.
Good. So Shred and Braden, I hope that answered your question. Thanks for asking. If you have any more questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll talk about them. Mark, I'm curious, you showed us Mendix 8. Is Mendix 8 or Studio Pro 8, is that your default Studio Pro version that you work in? Or does it depend on your client? And maybe follow-up question, have you checked out Mendix 9?
Yeah, so I'm not exactly what you call an early adopter any longer. I've been working with Mendix for 12 years, and I've learned that being an early adopter can be a bad thing. So yes, I working quite a bit more with Mendix 8. I've looked at 9, of course. We, as an MVP, we have some early views, and it's really exciting about what is to come. But I'll tell you, I haven't even been using Mendix 8 for very long. It feels like 7.23 something has been what I've been using for quite some time now. And well, I guess it depends on how you look at it, but I'm very comfortable in saying that because it is the long-term release, and it's worked well for the applications that we've used it for.
Fantastic. Yeah. And so how do you determine which version you're going to use? Does it depend on client or? the time investment or your knowledge or your team's knowledge, or how do you make
so
that decision?
there's definitely a few things that go into it. You know, ideal world, anytime you start a new project from scratch, you want to get to the most recent long-term release support version to make sure that you're far as early into the window of support as possible. But then you have things like marketplace components that may come in, play a factor. So if there's something that doesn't, in essence, say work with your version, then you might want to consider. Also with Kinetech, we actually offer a number of different templated solutions, which are in Mendix 7. So by default, if you're signing up for one of those, we're likely to start in Mendix 7. We do have some of them converted to Mendix 8, but you know, that's, so, you know, that obviously that's a pretty easy one is, hey, you're going to use something we've already built the majority for. Yes, let's use the version that was already built in. So yeah, there's.
Is it ever the other way around? So you, for example, you said sometimes, you know, on the newest versions, not all marketplace content has been updated yet. Is it ever the other way around where you're thinking, hey, ooh, there's some really nice new features in these newer versions that I'm missing out on? How do you decide like what
Yeah,
you're going to
so
miss out on, or yeah?
well, I mean, we could travel all the way back to the release of Mendix 4, which introduced mobile. And so, of course, at the time we were
That was
building
2014, January 2014.
Yeah,
7 years
I know
ago.
you weren't driving yet, but but that version released the first mobile. At the time, we were building an application for Liberty Mutual, who actually wanted it to be mobile first. So it was a requirement. We had to use that. The very first Mendix 4 release came with a mobile application that we built for that insurance company. So
right.
I mean, that's just an example of, yeah, if there's functionality, we actually have a customer that we're finding a lot of redirect needed. We're using you know, different services for payments and what have you, and selection of people and relationships that go into other applications. And so we're redirecting. And oftentimes it's a lot easier to redirect just using a JavaScript snippet, which of course wasn't possible until Mendix 8. So we're moving customers towards Mendix 8 for that specific reason.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yes, absolutely. There's definitely cases in which the functionality being offered by that version of the platform is obviously, it only gets better, right, Jan? So you're never going to say, oh, let me use an old one for specific functionality because the new one should be better.
Well, yeah, and I think you make a good point, right? You do want to make sure that you're at least using a version that is still supported, preferably one that is long-term supported, of course. So
right.
At some point, you know, even though, you know, we just launched Mendix 9, that means the clock's ticking on Mendix 7, right?
Correct.
So sooner or later, yeah, upgrade is of course inevitable. But thank you for sharing, yeah, insight into that and how you approach that.
Sure.
And I want to thank the people today for watching as well. I hope this has been helpful. I hope it's been an event where you've learned something new. Let us know what you think of these sessions and if you've learned something, and if you have any ideas for things that you want to learn more about, either through an Art of the Possible session, a live build. I don't know, maybe we should just invite Johan and Han back to the session. I don't know what makes you, you know, get you people going, but let us know and we'll create the content for you to help you become a better developer, and just you know, so that people can recognize you on the street and say, wow, isn't that Mendix developer who built? Yeah. Who knows? You know, maybe this will happen someday.
Yeah,
for now, thank you, Mark. I don't know if people are recognizing you on the street, but you're definitely a Mendix MVP, and you've absolutely earned this status with 12 years of experience and just incredible content, incredible achievements. So thank you for that.
Thanks for having me.
And for everyone, next week, we're doing a deep dive into the latest release, Studio Pro 9.3. We'll have Danny Roost, front-end guru and product manager in R&D from Mendix. We'll have Willem van Zandvoort and Paul Ketelaars, both MVPs, to talk about what's new in Mendix 9.3, and we'll do some live demos. So make sure you tune in for that, which is Tuesday next week, this time. I'm Jan de Vries, your low-code host, and I'll see you in the next session.